Axis Fiduciary is a corporate and trust service provider licensed as a management company by the Mauritius regulator. It has 12 years of existence, over which it has built a solid reputation for advising and assisting, particularly overseas clients and corporates and high net worth individuals in their cross-border development efforts. And it did so by way of cross-border structuring. It provides services for the incorporation of fit-for-purpose vehicles and structures customized to the needs of its clients. Axis also provides administrative, regulatory, and tax services to maintain the company, partnership, or trust, as it may be, in a state of compliance with local laws and regulations, and in so doing, take that burden off the shoulders of the clients, who can then focus on their business strategies. Axis specialist areas of corporate and trust services, investment funds, private wealth, and accounting and tax services. Axis works in tandem with BLC Robert and Associates. Though they are independent firms, Axis and BLC share common core values, which include a passion for what they do. BLC is a registered law firm, and it provides only legal advice and litigation services. It is probably the largest law firm in Mauritius, with 8 partners working in practice teams ranging from corporate law and mergers and acquisitions to banking, financial regulation, and dispute settlement areas. BLC combines its legal advisory expertise with Axis performance capabilities to offer to clients a seamless delivery and enhanced client experience. It is a unique business proposal resting on value for money principle. Jason Harrell, I suppose that your premise is that Mauritius is an international financial center, what we commonly refer to as an IFC. What is an IFC and how does Mauritius qualify for it? In what way it is relevant to our viewers?
So if we think of an IFC, the original IFCs actually would be the City of London, New York, Hong Kong. These are the place where originally IFCs came about. And then as time went by, other sort of regional IFCs came into being, such as Mauritius, Singapore, the Channel Islands, and so on, and some of the Caribbean islands came to the British Virgin Islands and so on, came to be known as IFCs. So let's look into what the role of the IFCs is all about. First of all, the role of the IFCs is mainly one is in respect of risk management. So often people would be looking at a safe jurisdiction in which they would place their investments for investing elsewhere into a particular jurisdiction. So for instance, what they would be looking at is a stable legal and regulatory environment. We will be looking at a stable judicial system. We will be looking at a stable political and system, whereby where the political is extremely stable. They will be looking at a country in which currencies may come in and out without any hindrance or without any risk of them putting their money, for instance, in a dollar account in that country and able to take it out as and when they would wish it to be able to take out. So these are, so effectively, so this is risk management purposes. the legitimate, let's call it, minimization of a tax burden. So often you look at, for instance, a jurisdiction which has a low tax rate or a neutral tax rate. You would use a IFC for compliance and governance purposes. So, for instance, if you had a private equity fund, it would be often important to have an administrator who is impartial, who is independent, who is well regulated, and that becomes more and more important since the post-Abraj environment. The confidentiality issues is obviously extremely important as well. So investors and all would want their affairs to be kept discreetly and professionally. It is important, IFC, as I said, the free movement of currency is important for treasury management purposes as well. So if, for instance, you would want to have holding a number of currencies in a country with the ability to deploy that currency in other countries and so on, that's important. For the purposes of holding companies, so if you're doing business in a number of jurisdictions and would need a country to hold the investments in these to do business in a number of countries. So, for instance, we've seen that a lot in Africa, whereby you have holding companies in Mauritius doing business in a number of jurisdictions. So they need a country whereby they can have a holding entity. So this is where the role of an IFC comes about. Mauritius, the features of Mauritius as an IFC is that, number one, we've got a strong legislative framework. So it is extremely important to have the relevant legislation in place, and the relevant legislation started to be put in place as from 1992 and has been constantly evolving. That's the first issue. And the second issue is obviously to have a strong regulator of the IFC. So we've got the Financial Services Commission, which effectively is the starting place of any IFC. So strong legislative framework and strong regulator. Obviously, the second point, which is important for to make sure that the legislation works effectively, is to have an independent and functioning judicial system. So as far as Mauritius is concerned, we have a completely independent judicial system, right, with our highest court of appeal in the United Kingdom. So the Privy Council is our highest court of appeal, and therefore there is, even, we are a small country, we've got access to a sophisticated judicial system. We've got a skilled and professional workforce. We've got a neutral and low tax system. It is politically stable. There is no foreign currencies in Mauritius. We've got a number of international banks in Mauritius and strong local banks as well. With our largest bank having a market cap of a very strong local market cap. We've got we've got a sophisticated capital market in Mauritius, right? And that all of that makes Mauritius a very appealing IFC.
How all those aspects or merits and qualities of Mauritius as an IFC are used for the structuring of businesses and investment through Mauritius by international clients? This is a question probably that is best addressed by Jean-Claude. Those entities in Mauritius and why it is important, it is useful to have them in Mauritius.
We usually have these questions, and it comes with what is a global business company? And in short, we need to refer to the Financial Services Act, Section 71, to have the strict definition of what is a global business company. In that section, it doesn't call it a global business company. It calls it a global business corporation. And in short, it is, coming back to the company, it is a company incorporated under the Companies Act 2001, established to conduct business principally outside of Mauritius. And that company, it will be a company which is ultimately owned or controlled by a person which is not a citizen of Mauritius. So it is actually a structure, a setup, and as I said, it refers to the Financial Services Act refers to it as a corporation, and the definition of corporation includes in the same act a body of persons. It includes a trust, society, foundations, and so on. So it is a structure set up by a foreigner meant to conduct business principally outside Mauritius. What are the use then of the GBC? So the GBC, as I said, with that special license, the Global Business License, which is delivered by the Financial Services Commission upon application for the setup of that entity, is actually used. If we start with the simplest structure, that would be what we refer as a simple investment holding company. And then a little bit more complex one would be very often referred to as a master holding, which would be a major parent company with sub holdcos, as we call it, and having investments cross-border, i.e. in the different countries across the continent, worldwide. And these structures would, by extension then, also overlap on fund structures, fund managers having their setup in Mauritius, and then working alongside these funds for the investment into Africa. So these fund managers, fund advisors will also need a GBC1 license, in addition to their special license that normally these financial services entities would be called upon to have. So what else about the global business company or global business license, as we call it? Throughout the years, the holdco then have proved to be a powerful tool in the hands of shareholders, investors, business entrepreneurs, for them to use as an umbrella to hold these different operating subsidiaries and companies in different countries. The DFIs very much will be using the GBC companies. And again, as I mentioned earlier, that would include fund structures and ancillary companies servicing the fund, investment fund businesses towards the objective they have into segregating different business assets and activities in different countries, and as well as engaging in legitimate transfer pricing transactions, amongst others. I have to add at the same time that Mauritius also offers a number of a special regime with regard to cross-border investment in terms of facilitating these investment. The global headquarter administration is one of them, Global shared services is another one of them. And global treasury activities is a third one. And these, in addition to having a number of incentives in terms of facilitation with regard to work permits and so on, also offers a favorable tax regime, including in a couple of them very good tax holidays in the first years of the operation. Maybe last, before I conclude, I would say, what are the features of the GBC? To keep it short, the GBC has three main features. First one is to carry out its core income generating activities from Mauritius or in Mauritius. Second, it has to be managed and controlled from Mauritius. And these 2 points will be covered by Assad a little bit later. And the third one, not the least, is it has to be administered by a management company. Now, before maybe I come to this third point, which is why is it that it has to be administered by a management company, I would just cover very quickly a number of very quick technical points that also adds to the features of the GBC. So a GBC can be a public company, a private company, a limited life company. It can be structured as a protected sale company. Its principal bank account has to be in Mauritius, in addition to it being possible also for it to have an account, a second account outside Mauritius. It has to have individuals as directors, so corporate directors are not allowed. The shares can be issued at with par value or without par value. This very often is a very interesting part of the GBC. So the earlier point I referred to as regards to why is it under the administration of a management company. So many of you in the audience would be familiar with the concept of registered agent in many other jurisdictions, which role is principally to assist in the incorporation of a company, having a registered office address, and do the statutory filing. However, the Mauritius jurisdiction has been long, since its early days, gone beyond this traditional role just mentioned. In fact, the management companies, through what they do, have earned Mauritius a reputation of being either rather a mid-shore jurisdiction, i.e. with much more substance than just the registered agent role. And the management companies as such then take care of many of the operational matters of a company, i.e. the accounting, the company secretarial, corporate administration, and compliance. And as you would also know, the world has evolved into a more regulated environment. You have FATCA, we have CRS, which is a common reporting system. We have much of the anti-money laundering and counterfeit terrorism regulations. So the MC role, the management company role, is pivotal to the whole ecosystem around a GBC, in that it assists tremendously the international business community, our clients, the entrepreneurs, and the experts in the operation of the structures. And as I think earlier Iqbal said, you concentrate on what you do best, the business on the ground, and the running of the company is very much taken care of by the management company.
Mauritius have got all those interesting qualities as an IFC, and the way to structure a cross-border business is through the use of global business companies. And you have explained to us how we go about to do this with the management company. May I now turn to Assad to explain to us, for the benefit of our viewers, what are those requirements for the GBCs, as we are calling them? Assad, can you explain that to us?
International business activities from Mauritius, they have to do so through a legal entity which is established in Mauritius, and generally this is structured as a global business company, although there are other possibilities as well, but for the purposes of today's presentation, we have focused on the GBC because it is probably one of the most used vehicles for the conduct of cross-border investment and trade. Now, Jean-Claude has alluded to it briefly, and I will just perhaps provide a bit more details on the requirements for a global business company. The main requirement of a global business company is the requirement for what we call in our common jargon, substance over form. So a global business company needs to ensure that it has the necessary substance requirements in Mauritius, because a global business company is regarded as a company which is resident for tax purposes in Mauritius. And as we shall see later on, it is this element of it being tax resident in Mauritius which makes it very attractive in the context of cross-border investment and trade. Now, in terms of the requirements, it needs to comply with substance requirements, as I mentioned, and these come effectively in three main brackets. First of all, it needs to carry out its core income generating activities in or from Mauritius, as required under the necessary income tax legislation. Secondly, it needs to be managed and controlled from Mauritius. And thirdly, Jean-Claude alluded to it earlier on, it must be administered by a management company. And management companies are companies like Axis Fiduciary, which are licensed by the Financial Services Commission to provide administration, accounting, and compliance related services. Let's drill down a little bit in the second requirement, the control and management, because this is the requirement that very likely gives rise to a lot of questions from clients. Now, in order for a GBC to satisfy the management and control test, there are a prescribed list of requirements under the law that the company has to comply with. For example, there is a requirement for 2 directors resident in Mauritius who must be of sufficient caliber to exercise independence of mind and judgment. And very often, this is a function that the very senior management officials of Axis and also sometimes the partners of BLC would provide. The second requirement is the requirement of a principal bank account in Mauritius. Thirdly, there is also a need for the company to keep and to maintain at all times its accounting records at its registered office in Mauritius. It needs to prepare its financial statements and have them audited in Mauritius. It must also ensure that the decision-making process is seen to be carried out from Mauritius through the organization of regular board meetings. And there is also a requirement for these meetings to include the 2 Mauritian resident directors. Obviously, the issue of central management and control is one which is ascertained through facts, and therefore this list is by no means exhaustive, but it is at least, provides clients with guidance as to what they need to do to ensure that the company is seen to be controlled and managed from Mauritius. Now, this is in respect of control and management. Jean-Claude has talked about the role of the management company, like Axis, in respect of administering the GBC, in respect of ensuring that the company is compliant with the legal and regulatory framework, is compliant in respect of the filing requirements, etc. Last but not least, I mentioned the requirement of the core income generating activity, and that is a requirement that has been recently introduced and must be adhered to in order for the company to benefit from the incentive rate of taxation that global business companies are subject to. And this is basically that a global business company is taxable at the rate of 15%, 1-5, but depending on the type of activity that this global business company is conducting, it is able to claim a partial exemption, which basically would bring the effective tax rate to about 3%, because the partial exemption is equivalent to 80% of the certain types of foreign sourced income that the company receives. So just to talk a little bit about the way the taxation of a GBC works, a global business company is, as I mentioned, taxable at the rate of 15%. However, where the partial exemption applies, then there is an exemption of 80%, which is provided to any foreign source income that the company receives. And therefore, once the 80% partial exemption is applied, this results, therefore, in the foreign income to be taxable only at the rate of 3%. And there are a list of foreign source income that would be entitled to the partial exemption. And the most common one would be foreign dividends. So if a GBC is used, for example, to hold shares in an Egyptian company and therefore is receiving foreign dividends from that Egyptian company, it is allowed to claim the partial exemption. The partial exemption is also available to foreign source interest income. So if the Mauritian company has invested by way of debt and is receiving interest, it would also be subject to the partial exemption. And certain other categories of income, such as income attributable from the ship or aircraft leasing, income from collective investment schemes, closed-ended funds, CIS managers, etc., are also allowed to benefit from the partial exemption system. And maybe if I have time, I could also briefly talk about other taxation features. A GBC is also exempt from capital gains tax in Mauritius. So if a company established in Mauritius is disposing of shares, there is a tax treaty in place between Mauritius and that country. Very often it is Mauritius that has the taxing right on gains, and because Mauritius doesn't have capital gains tax, it is possible to legitimately avoid the payment of capital gains tax on disposal. There is also no withholding tax in Mauritius on payment of dividends, interest, or royalties. Jason mentioned it before. There is no, restriction on distribution. Their non-resident shareholders are not subject to any tax or other liability as holder or beneficial owner of shares in the GBC. Profits may be repatriated freely to the international investor. There are also exemptions from payment of Mauritian registration, capital, stamp, or other duty. And therefore, just to conclude, because I know I probably am running out of time, I simply want to say that through the use of a GBC, Iqbal, an international client can benefit from all the advantages that Mauritius offers as a jurisdiction.
In what way Mauritius would benefit our Egyptian viewers more usefully, more fruitfully than other jurisdictions like the BVI and others, which we mentioned earlier?
Yeah. There are a few unique features in respect to Mauritius. The first feature is that we've got a Egyptian embassy in Mauritius, which is of great use because when documents needs to be authenticated and so on, this can be easily done through the Egyptian embassy. So if you look at, for instance, another jurisdiction such as the BVI, whereby there's no Egyptian embassy, it becomes very complicated to authenticate documents. It needs to be sent to London and then couriered back to the BVI and back. It's extremely cumbersome. My understanding is that, for instance, to authenticate a document from the BVI takes some 14 days, whereas in Mauritius it would take you 2 to 3 days. That's a big advantage. The second advantage would be that we have a double taxation agreement between Mauritius and Egypt, a very favorable one. In fact, in respect of Egypt, there are mainly the one with, I believe, the Netherlands is comparable to that of Mauritius. The only difference is that Mauritius, the one with Mauritius, I believe, allows for the one with the Netherlands, there's no withholding tax in respect of dividends, whereas in Mauritius, there's a withholding tax up to 5%. But that's not an issue because we can get around this issue by having a bonus share and then a system of buyback, whereby this is it's not treated as a distribution by way of dividend, but rather a distribution by way of issuance of further shares and buyback of shares. So these are the two big advantages. The third advantage, which is extremely important, is that we're extremely knowledgeable in respect of the various jurisdictions in which Egyptians invest in, i.e. The rest of the continent, North Africa, the Middle East, and so on, is countries with which we have frequent dealings. And so that's an important criteria. And the time zone in respect between Mauritius and Egypt is not that significant, right? The difference in time zone. There's only 2 hours. So time zone and obviously the cost as well. I think in respect of, for instance, if you would set up a fund in Mauritius as compared to the BVI, sorry, to the Netherlands, which would be our nearest competitor in terms of a country of substance, the cost difference is extensive. I've heard recently a story of maybe the legal cost being 10 times more in the Netherlands than in Mauritius.
When you compare Mauritius to other similar jurisdictions, and here I think of maybe the BVI or Cayman, I think one of the main difference is that they do not have bilateral agreements with Egypt as opposed to Mauritius. We don't only have a double taxation treaty with Egypt, but we have a lot of bilateral commercial agreements as well, a history of trade and commerce with Egypt. And if you look at the double taxation agreement, because that's probably the most relevant one, we do see that there are quite interesting features. I can think, for example, of the withholding tax rate on the payment of dividends or interest from an Egyptian company to a Mauritian GBC, is only at 5%, provided that the Mauritian company owns more than 25% of the Egyptian company. So that's certainly an attraction. But I think the point that I'd like to make when compared to other jurisdictions is that, and it sort of is an extension to what I said earlier, is Mauritius is regarded as a jurisdiction of substance and allows for a lot of value-added services to be provided. For example, capital raising. We've worked with a few very prominent Egyptian companies who have successfully done their capital raise from Mauritius, because Mauritius gives a lot of comfort to investors for capital raising. Jason mentioned governance, treasury management, legal services, which probably would not, other jurisdictions may not have the breadth and depth of the services that we can provide.